In Part 6, we witness Thanos rise from disembodied soul to effective godhood. In his previous two attempts to rise to such power, he had faced Captain Marvel and Adam Warlock. In both those cases, it was because the hero had something that the villain wished to possess. The location of the cosmic cube in the mind of Rick Jones in the case of the former, and the elimination of the Magus and Warlock's soul gem in the latter. In this round, the Silver Surfer was his nemesis, but not by Thanos' choice this time, but rather because the Surfer was seen as the one who could possibly thwart him. Now, why is that? Because the presumption was that Thanos would be carrying out his plans in a straightforward manner, executing half the population to reach Death's goal. The Silver Surfer had gone through the Kree Skrull War and eventually picked a side, so the possibility that he would become involved in such a campaign, now that he was free from imprisonment on Earth, seemed likely. But Thanos defies expectations by avoiding such a plan, skipping that approach entirely. Thanos returns not with force, but guile. He alone gains a true understanding of the soul gems, and he alone has the will to unlock their full potential. Before we return to the place we left off, we need to return to the Silver Surfer Annual number 3 first, the one that wrapped up the crossover called Lifeform, remember? The final story in that book is Shades of Guilt, written by Ron Mars, who, as established, was working closely with Starlin on the Silver Surfer. Some alien casually dismisses the multitudes of some other trusting species that he seemingly just murdered, whom we soon learn are the Elowan. They are an isolated and peaceful species that, before that bad guy, had only ever met one alien, the Surfer himself. He travels there for a respite from the responsibilities he's been shouldering of late. Keep in mind, this is in the time frame when he thought Thanos dead, so he had no pressing matters. This is Garnock, who says they thought him an incarnation of their god, and so at his command they all Jim Jonesed and ate poison. With no means to deal with Garnock like incarceration or exile, the Surfer unleashes the power cosmic on him until Garnock is finally destroyed. After starting an enormous pyre for the Elowan, the Surfer flies off, only for the ghost of Garnock to find and draw him to another place, an enormous grid. Only the Surfer learns that it is, in fact, a necropolis, filled with his victims. When he was herald to Galactus, as Garnock says, could a few good deeds balance out the genocides that the Surfer has caused? And as the Surfer brought justice against Garnock for wiping out the Elowan, Garnock brings justice against him by unleashing the vengeful dead upon him. The Surfer doesn't fight back, only pleading that his only crime was ignorance. The Surfer then finds himself on the asteroid where this all started and sees it as a way to remind himself of the past that he must still atone for. With that, we now return to where we had left off in Silver Surfer, issue number 48. It picks up where 47 had left off, after the Surfer and Drax had escaped the Soul Gem. Except the Surfer tells Drax to go on ahead to Titan. He intends to warn Earth's heroes, after he makes a personal stop first. He wants to talk to Galactus, and tells Nova to stay out of it. This is a private matter. It has to do with his creation, the bargain that he had struck. In return for sparing his world of Zenla, Norrin Radd would become the Herald of Galactus, finding him worlds to devour. I should mention at this point that while I realize it probably is supposed to be pronounced Norrin Radd, I'm going to be honest with you. I am not calling a naked man who flies around on a surfboard Mr. Rad. That's just fucking stupid. To carry it out, Galactus turned Norrin into an adolescent fantasy he'd had, the Silver Surfer, being the incarnation of his own imagination. But now the Surfer questions if something more was done. Warlock said that his soul had been tampered with, and so he brings up the confrontation with Garnock. He was overwhelmed by guilt in the hallucination, which is something that he hadn't felt before, despite all the deaths that he was culpable for. Galactus admits that Norrin Radd was too honorable a man to do what needed to be done, and so modifications were made to ensure that he could serve as a herald without his conscience getting in the way. At the Surfer's insistence, Galactus undoes the changes, and it all slowly sinks in. As I've said before, while Starlin uses books to tell stories of Thanos, the stories are about the changes the characters undergo as well. Captain Marvel went from being a warrior to a champion. Warlock went from being a Christ figure certain of the answers to a half madman forced to confront his hypocrisy as a presumed object of worship. And in this, the Surfer is revealed to have spent these years without truly realizing the scope of his crimes. The internal monologue is powerful. Razor-sharp guilt slashes away at the comforting illusions of ego and self-delusion. My life is exposed for the sham it truly is. The mask of self-righteous virtue is torn from my face. I am forced to gaze deeply into the mirror of self-realization. After seemingly drowning in a sea of the blood of his victims, Galactus offers to return him to the way he was. The Surfer refuses. I have a past and sins I must learn to accept and live with, take responsibility for. Too long have I hidden away in the cozy harbor of self-deceit. Never again. I will either come to terms with my soul's burden or die trying. A man can live no other way and remain a man. The Silver Surfer has chosen the path of not ignoring his sins, but one instead of atonement and acceptance. This makes his opposition to Thanos' plans even more personal now. Thanos intends to wipe out half the population of the universe, so saving those lives is a step forward in balancing the scales of the Surfer's crimes. The Surfer leaves with a warning of the power that Thanos now possesses, and that even Galactus is unlikely to be safe from him. Galactus dismisses these petty concerns, but as mentioned in Part 6, Thanos comes to tell Galactus to stay out of it. When Galactus indicates that he's not going to be dictated to, Thanos demonstrates his power not through might, but by simply taking the planet that Galactus was about to consume and making it disappear. But sitting in the back of his hand, someone plots his downfall. Warlock tells the other denizens that the choice is either to hide here and hope to stay beyond the Mad God's notice, or to join in facing him. Warlock intends to do that, with the reasoning that he has a distinct advantage. All of Thanos' plans were forged without Warlock being considered. In other words, he's an X factor in this. He could be the wild card needed to stop Thanos' eternal domination of the universe. No pressure. Issue 49 begins with Drax on Titan, having reached that world, but forgetting what he had to say, much to Arrow's severe irritation. Speaking of which, that's what Thanos currently feels towards Mephisto. The one-time master schemer is little more than a sycophant now, a yes-man, as Thanos knows what the Silver Surfer is doing, has the power to eliminate him right now, yet chooses to instead send a creature out to face him. He takes an innocent primitive, not unlike the ones that were devastated by the plague the Surfer brought to their world on his skin, and transforms the creature into a monster. The monster is gifted some of Thanos' power, although that's open to interpretation. There's a suggestion of intelligence to it, certainly, as it attacks a Kree research base to draw in the Surfer, but there's also far more power in it than the Surfer thinks possible. It was crafted by a being without limits, after all, not the result of either evolution or superscience. The Surfer tries everything he can think of, but no matter what, the creature's able to just keep coming, until Thanos' transformation just ends. All he wished for was delay, and he has more in mind, though we discover that the Mad Titan smashes the now frail creature beneath his boot. A cruelty, perhaps, but then again, to Thanos, death is the granting of mercy, so what it means is open to interpretation. However, the final page of the issue points to where the landmark 50th issue will go, as we return to Thanos' original body, still stone in the depths of Mentor's home. As I said, 50 is a landmark, and so it's a double-sized issue. And while it continues to tie into Thanos' story, Starlin makes especially clear that however much he goes back to Thanos, this is the Silver Surfer's book. This is about him. Thanos wallops the surfer onto the moon as he nears the Earth, causing him to be dazed enough to recall his youth back on Zenla. Jartran, his father, comes to wake him. Note the detail in the background, that heroic figure riding a kind of flying sled, likely the inspiration for the fantastical concept of the Silver Surfer that Norn would one day become. In the waking world, Thanos' previous body stands over him, making Thanos rather unique in that he is reanimating himself. Stone Thanos remarks about the Surfer being one of his more fascinating enemies, in some ways a kindred spirit. A comparison the Surfer does not care for, naturally, and the mention of the issue of forgiveness is so tender, the Surfer just blasts Stone Thanos, which gets him a blast of his own. That prompts Thanos to understand why, because as he notes, when you're all powerful, you've no need to kill your enemies. So he starts to pry into Nornrod's past, where we see young Shala Bal trying to get him to stop his studies and appreciate their perfect world. But Norn is displeased that they are coddled from the cradle to the grave, something he's picked up from his father. Their people don't have their spirit anymore. They've atrophied. The absence of struggle has eliminated a drive towards growth. When they go look at some of their people in the park, they've lost themselves in drugs because they have nothing else. Thanos can see that the young Norn worships his father, believes in everything he says, takes it to heart, including how common suicide has become on their world, like Norn's mother. Jartran receives a reward for an improvement that he's made to a leisure device, even as he laments not having the funding for real scientific progress. He finds this hero worship of Jartran to be interesting, which goads the Surfer into futilely attacking, only for the probing of his memories to continue. It's then that we learn that in creating the new device, Jartran used the work of others without crediting them. His refusal to do so has put his award in question and cost him Norn's respect. The Surfer responds to the probing, though, with an unforeseen attack and smashes Stone Thanos with his board. But even that doesn't shut him up. He literally pulls himself together and forces the Surfer to share what happened. And what happened was what Jartran said was becoming all too common on Zenla. The man killed himself. Thanos is amused that Nornrod chose to serve Galactus to save his world, a world he regards with contempt, yet didn't save his father when all it would have taken was a sympathetic word. The Surfer blasts the Stone Thanos to dust, but not before Thanos gives permission to continue on his way and deliver his warning to Earth. He doesn't mind. Torn by the dichotomies of himself the Surfer has seen so far, he says that his black and white views might have been mistaken. How appropriate, considering that once silver does lose its luster, it's just another shade of gray. Looking back upon Starlin's run for Silver Surfer, among the things that stand out is that the shadow of Thanos is so much larger than the man himself. Before he assembles the Infinity Gems, Thanos appears in 3 issues, 4 if you want to include the pre-recorded message played at Dynamo City. In 34, he returns. In 35, he explains his new purpose. In 38, he deceives the Surfer into thinking that he was dead. When he returns to the pages of Silver Surfer in 44, 6 months later, it is with a demonstration that he has become a threat far beyond what the Silver Surfer could possibly handle. Thanos looms over things in his absence, his past acts of hubris and current dark plans creating atmosphere and shaping the Silver Surfer's actions. In the stories, Starlin addresses the Superman issue that is the Silver Surfer, in that the character has incredible power, which makes it difficult to throw something at him that creates tension. The thing Starlin utilizes, the taking of the Silver Surfer's power, and subjecting him to both humiliation and a vision of the plights of the powerless. Then he gives the Surfer back his power, only to reveal that he is still powerless. He can neither punish the ruling class of Dynamo City, nor liberate its downtrodden, not without causing more harm than good. The 4 classic conflicts are man versus man versus nature, man versus society, and man versus self. It is on the latter two that the surfer struggles, for great power can do nothing for either. You can overpower society and destroy it with great might, but that cannot change society. You can overcome a despot, perhaps, but you cannot be sure the power vacuum will be an improvement. As for man versus self, the surfer has recurring problems that he must overcome. We see in life form what happens when to follow his code about not taking innocent life means that an innocent must suffer a fate worse than death. How ironic that when put into a situation like Thanos has suggested, where death is a mercy, he must question the morality of choosing to follow his own moral code. And as we've seen here, he has been forced to come face to face with his failure as both Nornrod, being unwilling to give a kind word to his father when the man no longer measures up to the giant of his son's mind, and also as the Silver Surfer, that his good deeds do not outweigh the lives that he has taken, and his current desires to reject responsibility and merely sail the space lanes. The final pages of Starlin's run on Silver Surfer are of him, a man who was once the guide for a space-borne mass murderer, having embraced the responsibility required to oppose a space-borne mass murderer. The first time the Silver Surfer came through a skylight, way back in Fantastic Four number 49, he said, "I am what I must be." As he crashes through a similar window, that on the roof of the Sanctum Sanctorum, his acknowledgement of what he is different, that he is a flawed and imperfect man. That is true, but he arrives having chosen what he will be, not a pawn or bystander, but a warning of the death that is coming for this world and all worlds, as we see in the pages of Infinity Gauntlet number 1. Infinity Gauntlet number 1 begins with Thanos and Mephisto on a barren world, where Thanos has made the decision. His power until now has had within it the barb that it hasn't given him what he most desires, the love of Mistress Death. He has toyed with his power since then, but it is now that he has decided to take the next step in his ascension and claim his place among the pantheons of the universe, as the head of them all, in fact. On Earth, Doctor Strange finds the passed-out Silver Surfer on his floor and tends to him, hearing the warning and allowing for the setup for the concept of the series, of Thanos' return, the supposed imbalance that Death sees, Thanos gaining the Soul Gems, and now having unlimited power. He also tells of the trip into Soul World, where they encountered Adam Warlock. While they grapple with that, someone narrates about a trio of losers who knocked over a liquor store, murdered the shopkeeper, and proceeded to get liquored up in a bar in upstate New York. We gradually realize, after these dimwits drive off the road and die in a fiery crash, that Warlock plans for these to become their new bodies. It's going to take a little while to turn them into something more fitting for himself, Gamora, and Pip the Troll. While they see to that, Thanos tries again to win Mistress Death's heart, but she won't speak to him, and chafes in the position of having him as her superior. He builds a floating shrine to her, but that does nothing to win her over. Mephisto thus points out that Death is a dark entity, so Thanos must prove he is worthy of that. He must do something to demonstrate that he understands what she wants. So to prove it, he summons Nebula, still burned to the point of being on the cusp of death, yet not permitted to succumb. The response is only scorn. Mistress Death finds your boasts empty and your bravado distasteful. Similar to when Ratter delivered such a message, Thanos destroys this guy too. Deader, I guess. Mephisto points out that perhaps what riles up Death isn't what he's done, but what he hasn't done. And so Thanos follows through on the promise that he had made, half the population of the universe. And the idea of it is conveyed with a simple gesture that would be forever associated with the power, a snap of his fingers. Some, like Spider-Man, sense the change, while Captain America witnesses it as Cersei and Hawkeye vanish before his eyes. Nick Fury notes it's the whole planet, and the Hulk, in a new incarnation, thinks the Abomination is involved. More on that later. Wong vanishes in the home of Doctor Strange, while the Surfer senses the universal disappearances. It prompts the Skrulls to prepare for a war against the Kree and causes discord on Titan when Mentor vanishes in front of the easily confused Drax. And as for our trio from Soul World, Gamora has returned only to be among those taken by the snap. And Warlock? He's in a cocoon. It's his way. Infinity Gauntlet number 1 is about two things: making the story accessible to those who haven't followed the events of Silver Surfer, and establishing the threat they now face and this demonstration of power. George Perez's artwork is, well, art. These pages almost feel like books of yore with the layouts. Starlin paces it well, not throwing the backstory at us all at once, but having the Surfer fill us in just a little at a time. And for anyone whose first experience with the idea is Infinity War, the film, it had to be a surprise that this issue is so cerebral. Of course, Thanos already has the gems at the start, so there's no need to attain them. But still, in keeping with the death of Captain Marvel, Starlin trusts in the readers being willing to follow him. And it was trust well placed. The story begins with a promise, and the reader is convinced to accept that promise. Our first crossover issue is in The Incredible Hulk 383. This isn't actually branded as being a crossover, but while much of it isn't about the event, there is some, and it sets up the background of the Hulk's role in all of this. Now, the thing to note is that this is not long at all after Doc Samson had worked to address the Hulk's complex issues by integrating the Joe Fixit persona that we saw during the Evolutionary War and the Savage Hulk that is the most famous persona, and Bruce Banner, into one single person, having all of their aspects: the Savage Hulk's emotion, Joe Fixit's self-assurance, Banner's intellectual drive. This incarnation has been called the Professor and inspired the taco-giving Hulk of Avengers Endgame. Except while that was essentially Bruce Banner's mind in the body of the Hulk, this is an acceptance of all his aspects. We won't get into it beyond that. It's just important to understand we're not dealing with Bruce Banner's brain in the Hulk's body, nor are we dealing with the Hulk having access to Banner's intelligence. This is someone who has been at war with himself for forever, finally having made peace with himself, and is comfortable with having the power of a monster and the intellect of a super genius. The points that are relevant for our purposes are the Abomination hiding in the sewers in a trench coat and hat a la the Ninja Turtles, while pining for his love Nadia, who's in New York. 1991, so the Soviet Union was on its last legs. Nadia, we learn, is an actress now starring in Metamorphosis, and the Pantheon, a group the Hulk is also just hooked up with, are concerned that she's being stalked and believe the Abomination is the most likely culprit. While they plan to deal with that, the Silver Surfer has awakened in Doctor Strange's house, ranting about the terrible threat that Thanos poses to the universe. Well, during the performance of Metamorphosis, the actor playing Gregor just vanishes. Doctor Strange witnesses Wong vanish as well, and Spider-Man has his spider sense go crazy. As more people disappear, the Hulk bursts in, thinking it must be the Abomination, only to witness Rick himself vanish too. The Silver Surfer senses all the loss, but for the Abomination, this is all just a sign that he was meant to be with Nadia. He's meant to protect her. The Hulk goes to intervene when the Abomination makes off with her, only the streets are so packed by panicked people he can't jump down without squishing them. By the time he manages to catch up with him, he's good and mad, convinced the Abomination is behind all of this. But while he's roughing the Abomination up, a portal appears and draws him away. And with that, we now cross over to Doctor Strange Sorcerer Supreme, number 31. The issue picks up after Wong vanished and the Silver Surfer passed out again, overwhelmed sensing all of those deaths. Strange is unsure what to do. His magic can do more harm than good if he doesn't know what's wrong, and with this rebuilt by Galactus body, his medical knowledge is useless too. That's when James Dean shows up. It's Rintrah, who was out and thus mimicking someone else in order to blend in. Better a dead actor than a real cowman. He returned because Ime and half of all the other humans out there all vanished, and Dr. Strange feels that he has no choice but to go into the Silver Surfer's mind and find the answer. He finds himself in outer space, spotting the shining light of Zenn-La, but the Surfer himself intervenes, trying to stop him from reaching it. He's chosen to surrender to this rather than face the nightmare of Thanos' universal dominion. Strange drives him away with a kitchen sink spell, throw all the deities that will help him into a spell at once, and heads to Zenn-La to witness the days when the Surfer was just plain old Norrin Rod with Shala-Bal. Galactus naturally shows up, easily avoids their weapon supreme, and prepares to take the energy of this world, only for Norrin to offer to become the Herald. This, the Surfer laments, was a mistake, as Galactus later returned once the Surfer sided against him to protect Earth, so it was all for nothing. So Strange uses his power to show what would have happened if Norrin had instead changed his mind at the last moment, as the Surfer himself is doing now. But he witnesses the destruction of his world, powerless now to do anything about it. He even sees the death of Shala-Bal. And if that's not bad enough, Strange points out that without having had a first herald, Galactus never considers getting one, and wanders blindly through the galaxy, eliminating Earth as well. It's a cap to the story that we saw in the pages of the Surfer's own book, as he confronts the sins of his past to see that by taking on those sins, by taking on the guilt of countless lives lost, the Silver Surfer has, in fact, saved many, many more. Speaking of which, we return to Silver Surfer's book with issue 51, now openly written by Ron Marz. As mentioned earlier, Galactus was denied the planet that he was going to consume by Thanos, forcing him to find and consume another. Well, time is a factor now. There's no telling when action will be needed, and they can't have the Devourer of Worlds going in there on an empty stomach. So this is about Nova and her feelings on things. She was in the arms of both the Surfer and Firelord in the pages of this book, and while she respects the Surfer more, she doesn't like his holier-than-thou attitude. But she recalls their last meeting, which took place between the events of Dynamo City and the Surfer's trip to Titan to look at the corpse that was not, in fact, Thanos. The Surfer took her to a nearby world with primitive avian humanoids, and after she said she'd lead Galactus to it, and no one will miss these backwards losers, he takes her to another world of primitives. Only the cave paintings tell her this is Earth, tens of thousands of years ago, and she'd have sacrificed it to Galactus without a second thought. Worlds like these have potential, he shows her. It's up to her to lead Galactus to other worlds whenever she can. It's just that this time that qualifier comes in. There's no other world in range that'd fit, and Thanos is such a threat that it has to be this one. She asks if the locals might be spared, which pisses Galactus off to no end. He consumes the place and is now ready, but Nova wonders what she'll do the next time there's a conflict between her duty and her conscience. This brings us to a part that I have mixed feelings about. It's Quasar 26 and 27. Some writers struggle with writing certain characters. Starlin himself, for instance, writes the Professor Hulk much more like a thug than he is. Similarly, Mark Grunwald, as previously established, writes Thanos with all the subtlety of a lead pipe. However, I don't want to dismiss it because what Grunwald is doing is important around Thanos. It's just that what he does with Thanos is unimpressive. So for that reason, we're going to hold Quasar back and instead go on straight to Infinity Gauntlet number 2. After a splash panel announcing that Thanos is quite pleased with his godhood, we cut to a double-page spread of a plane crash in New York with the Avengers on hand trying to sort it out. She-Hulk, Thor, Vision. And what kind of a threat is it when the heaviest hitters of the Avengers feel street level as they respond? As they see to it, Quasar is summoned by Epic, Eon's offspring, to replace the dead entity, and another presence there as well, and so he must suit up. Amusingly, I'm fairly certain Quasar's wearing the wrong costume. It was part of that storyline that Wowbagger the Infinitely Prolonged, that Quasar's costume change had created a temporal anomaly that helped him save the universe. Quasar then created his own new costume, which was a sign that his apprenticeship was now over. I'm guessing no one sent George Perez the new one, or the apprentice had spoken too soon. Meanwhile, just like the Skrulls, the Kree presume this disappearance is a trick by their ancient enemies and prepare to go to war with them. The Silver Surfer is still not great, though, so Doctor Strange leaves him in the sun in the hopes that that will help him, and has Hank Pym look him over, but he has no more idea what to do than Strange does. But Strange's astral form is pulled away, but what is presumably the same being that was with Epic, saying the only hope is to gather the heroes under a single leader, himself. Doctor Strange says that's doubtful. He doesn't even trust this guy. So the being allows his soul to be open for Strange to inspect, and upon seeing it, gains Strange's complete confidence. But another doctor is also prying, Dr. Doom, who has located the source of the disappearance, but also the activity at Doctor Strange's home. Naturally, he's planning to get involved. On Titan, Eros, Firelord, and Drax are looking into the disappearances, only for Eros himself to now vanish. But he's not dead like the others. Rather, he's been brought to Thanos' floating shrine. He's good enough to identify to the reader all the players present, including Nebula, whom you'll recall he chased across galaxies trying to catch her after David Hasselhoff let her go, on account of how dangerous she was. Now she wanders about on the cusp of death, mind clearly gone. Eros tries manipulating Thanos, so Thanos simply gets rid of his mouth. That's what he intends to do with anything that could interfere. It's why Mentor was included with the half of the universe that was killed. It's also included a lot of the heroes, including the entirety of the Fantastic Four and almost all of X-Factor. Out of universe, the question was asked who wanted to be part of this event, and the X-Books made clear they wanted nothing to do with any of this cosmic stuff. Wolverine and Cyclops were all the series we're going to get. But in other books, their various goings-on are impacting events, like the fact that Eric Masterson's Thor is on hand and has to pretend that he's the Thor everyone knew in order to keep up appearances. Still, attempts to resist are coming together. The Skyfathers of the Pantheons of Earth gather on Asgard and agree to strike as one, while Quasar and Epic are poised to engage, and Warlock emerges from his cocoon, while Pip the Troll would prefer to just chill and watch Alf. As for Doctor Doom, he's broken into the Sanctum Sanctorum, captured Doctor Strange, and is able to outmuscle the Silver Surfer, who was already weakened from battling the Golem Thanos and crashing into this house. Fortunately, Warlock arrives before Doom can kill Doctor Strange and lays out what happened to him. Warlock insists that the only chance that they possibly have is for himself to lead the attack against Thanos, and Strange and the Surfer back him over Doctor Doom on the grounds that Warlock is not Doctor Doom. But time is of the essence, because when the delivering of her desire of half the lives in the universe fails to win Mistress Death over, and the inflicting of body horror upon Eros and Nebula likewise fails, Thanos finally loses his temper, demonstrating what that would actually look like under these circumstances. It unleashes a massive shockwave, capable of annihilating nearby planets with its sheer power. It's only at 2% of its power, according to Galactus, by the time it reaches Earth, and it still devastates the planet. The west coast of the U.S. is gone, broken off into the ocean. Wonder Man, Scarlet Witch, and the original Human Torch survived, but weren't able to save anyone else. The Pantheons gathered on Asgard are cut off by the release of power destroying the Rainbow Bridge, and Namor discovers huge underwater mountains rising up, which will create tsunami on the east coast of North America. And nothing can be done about it, or about the loss of Japan, or the other catastrophes that this is causing. This is the scale of the threat Thanos has become. His anger is earth-shattering. The Avengers are gathering those they can, but it will be down to Warlock to lead them. We'll see how well that works out in our next part as a desperate offense is called for.